He was found like this, lying on his side, on a dirt road forgotten by GPS, with his eyes closed as if he were still dreaming of something he never told anyone. No apparent marks of violence, no signs of struggle, just an immobile body, surrounded by silence and by a deadly secret. The man was clean, shaved, dressed in inconspicuous clothes and carrying a simple backpack. Inside it, an unopened pack of cigarettes, a new toothbrush, and a notebook. Blank. No identification, no clues about who he really was. The name he had given days earlier at a cheap hotel in the area was false, provably false, as if he knew that this would be the last place he would use an identity that never belonged to him. The investigators arrived shortly after. It was a farmer who called the police after finding the body near the fence of his property early that morning. He thought the man was sleeping, perhaps drunk. But as he approached, something in the rigidity of the scene revealed that something was wrong. Very wrong. The forensic team tried everything. They collected fingerprints, nothing in the system. They conducted dental examinations, tested DNA, searched international databases for matches. No results. It was as if he had appeared out of nowhere, lived a life parallel to any record, and chose to die in the same way. Invisible. But why would someone carry this silence until the end? Why would someone live under a false name, without leaving any trace of their true identity? What was he fleeing from? Or even more disturbing, who was he hiding from? Perhaps the answer lies in the forgotten details. Perhaps he was part of something bigger. Or maybe he himself was the danger. Have you ever gone through this? Have you ever wondered if you really know the people around you? What intrigues most about this case is not just the mystery of identity, but the fact that even after death he is still protecting himself, as if this deadly secret is still alive somewhere. And this transforms a nameless body into an enigma that challenges even the coldest logic of criminal investigation. There is something deeply psychological here, something that touches directly on the roots of criminal psychology. When someone completely erases their past, what does that say about the mind that made that decision? Perhaps he was a victim, perhaps he was an accomplice, or maybe the perpetrator of something that could never be revealed. And the most distressing part, no family appeared, no friends, no acquaintances, as if he did not exist for anyone else but himself. Stay with me until the end, because what you are about to discover may surprise you. What happened to this man goes far beyond a simple crime. We are talking about a story that mixes identity, silence, fear, and a deadly choice. But before you try to unravel this puzzle, it is important to understand the first steps of this investigation. Because sometimes the only thing more frightening than a guilty party is someone who died without leaving clues. And that's where it all begins. And that's where it all begins. As the investigators searched the surroundings for any hint, a footprint, a hair, a sign on the ground that would tell another part of the story, the world around continued spinning, indifferent. But for those who are listening to this story now, it may not be so simple to turn the page. Because on some level, this type of mystery speaks to something that lives inside us, an ancestral fear of disappearing without a trace, of being forgotten, of never being truly understood. If this subject makes sense to you, if you have ever felt this restlessness in the face of endless stories, leave in the comments what has touched you the most so far. It can be a feeling, a theory, or even something you have experienced. Sometimes what you share can open the eyes of someone who is watching too, and this creates a chain that goes far beyond the video. And if this content has made you think, captivated you, or made you feel something different, click the like button. It helps much more than it seems. The algorithm may be made of numbers, but what brings this channel to life is you. Your participation here is what makes this space grow and reach more people who, like you, thirst for stories that move the mind and heart. If you want to continue diving with us into cases like this, full of layers, psychology, and questions, still waiting for answers, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. It's free, but the impact of this is immense. With each new story, you will be connected from the very beginning, as part of a community that refuses to accept silence as an answer, because sometimes all we have is this: questions that no one Dare to ask. But together, maybe we can get a little closer to the truth. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. When the body was sent to the medical examiner's office, the experts expected this to be the simplest part of the investigation. After all, a technical report usually brings raw truths, fractures, toxins, internal injuries. But what they found was nothing short of disconcerting. No serious injuries, no toxic substances, no clear evidence of assault. It was as if the body were intact. And at the same time, carrying something the eyes could not see. The heartbeats had ceased, of course. But what caused the heart to stop? There was no hemorrhage, no asphyxiation, no signs of a heart attack. The heart simply shut down. A healthy organ in a functional body just terminating its function. And that's where things get really strange, because despite the serene appearance, the muscles showed deep tension, an unusual stiffening, as if the victim were on alert until the last second, as if he were waiting for something that never came. The skin bore small, almost imperceptible marks that did not indicate direct violence, but suggested prolonged contact with some form of restriction, some immobilization, confinement. No one could state for certain. What the expert said in clinical language was that there is no obvious cause of death. But what resonated among the investigators was something else. This man died with a weight that was not physical. And when we talk about transformation, it's impossible not to think about how this mysterious death suggests a drastic change, perhaps an attempt to cut the past, to reinvent oneself, to escape. But escape from what? Or from whom? There are deaths that seem to be the end of a journey, but there are others that sound like the punctuation of a story that was never told. A story full of gaps, hidden decisions, truths buried in silence. The doubt was not only in what was discovered, but in what was not found. No damaged organs, no internal bleeding, no poisoning. The report, which should have brought answers, raised even more questions. Her death without medical explanation is like a book with the pages torn out. You might know the ending, but you can't understand how it got there. In the world of criminal psychology, this type of scenario triggers very specific alerts. The absence of physical signs often points to something emotional, psychological, a deep trauma, constant pressure, or even an overwhelming guilt. Something that eats away from the inside out. It's as if this man were fleeing from a shadow that only he could see. A shadow that in the end proved to be stronger than the body itself. In these cases, what is unseen weighs more than any concrete evidence. The hidden truth that the report cannot reach, the impact of an entire life hidden behind a false name. And even in the absence of answers, the experts knew this was not just any death. It was the end of a story that was silenced before it even began. Comment a word that came to your mind now. It can be pressure, emptiness, fear, or simply, this intrigues me. Because sometimes what echoes after the silence says much more than any report. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. When the experts began to examine not just the body, but everything surrounding it, clothes, belongings, minimal choices of personal items, a new type of clue began to emerge. It wasn't physical, it was behavioral. It was as if every detail, no matter how simple, told a silent part of a story that this man never spoke aloud. The clothing, for example. Discreet, clean, without signs of prolonged use, almost like a costume calculated not to draw attention. The shoes were new, the shirt was plain, the jeans showed no wear. Everything seemed to have been chosen with a specific purpose, to be invisible. There were no photos, personal notes, or objects that evoked memories. No keys, no receipts, nothing that could indicate a place of origin or a destination. It's as if he had stripped himself of the past and donned a new life. And this kind of choice, when observed by those who understand the inner workings of the human mind, reveals much more than it seems. The silence he left was not casual. It was constructed. And behind this silence, what begins to emerge is a pattern. Perhaps he was someone meticulously reserved, or perhaps someone trained to disappear. Some specialists suggest the profile of a strategist, someone who underwent a profound rupture, capable of breaking away from everything familiar, including their own identity. Dissociation, in this case, would not merely be a defense mechanism. It would be the active construction of a new reality, a total reboot. But unlike someone seeking transformation for liberation, this type of change carries more the weight of a flight. Flight from what or from whom? That is the question that remains suspended, and it is impossible to ignore the possibility of trauma. Many behaviors that seemed cold or calculating may have actually originated from extreme pain. Imagine someone who has asked for help but was not heard. Someone who carried guilt that wasn't theirs for years until they decided to rewrite their own name, literally. This decision, as extreme as it may seem, is not uncommon in cases of abuse, persecution, or significant loss. Rather than dealing with the past, some prefer to bury it, along with any trace of who they once were. What is even more intriguing is that this man seems to have prepared to disappear. It wasn't improvised. It was a choice. And choices like that often arise in minds that carry more questions than answers. Minds shaped by constant pressure, the fear of being exposed, or the feeling that the real world no longer offered space for them to truly exist. Perhaps he felt like an imposter in his own skin, or maybe he was someone who had seen too much and knew that silence was the only way to keep breathing. Comment below. It's as if he disappeared on purpose. I want to know if that impression also crossed your mind, because understanding the mind behind the silence could be the first step for us to get closer to the truth. Now I want to dive even deeper into this topic. As soon as the case gained traction, the investigative team did what the protocol demands. They gathered everything. Footprints near the location, security cameras from neighboring streets, hotel records, bus station logs, any movement that could indicate who that man was, or at least where he had been in the last 48 hours. But what they found was the opposite of a trail. It was as if every attempt to follow a path led to a dead end. No face matched the database, no forgotten luggage, no hospital admission records, nothing. They even considered that he might have been using a false name due to involvement in some crime and cross-referenced the data with old occurrences, including in other states. But even in the underworld, that face was unknown. Not as a suspect, nor as a victim, nor as a witness. A sweep was conducted through profiles of missing persons, on social media, in witness protection lists. And with each inquiry, frustration grew. The more the police dug, the deeper the hole of the mystery became. The investigation then shifted to a more psychological plan. What if he was trying to erase traces by choice? That would explain the digital disappearance, the lack of traces, the almost calculated neutrality of each step. But even this theory stumbled because at some point, everyone leaves something behind. A look at the camera, a receipt in the pocket, a phone call, and in this case, it seemed like he had practiced his disappearance to perfection, as if the decision to vanish had been made long before the end. And this pattern, as frightening as it sounds, is not as unusual as one might think. There are people who choose to live on the fringes, people who frequently change cities, who avoid connections, who erase their digital footprints. It may be out of fear, trauma, paranoia, or something much deeper. The belief that the only way to stay alive is to cease to exist socially. This mentality shapes every action, from the way a person dresses to the route they choose to walk. And all of this appeared in fragments, in the footage from an old camera recovered from a small shop 5 blocks from where the body was found. He was there, buying a water bottle, looking down the whole time as if at any moment someone would recognize him. It was him, without a doubt. But even that footage offered nothing revealing. No words, no gestures, just a blur, a ghost that briefly crossed the visible world. The only certainty was the presence, and yet that said nothing about his origin. Each clue, instead of assembling the puzzle, seemed to dismantle the logic of the story even more. As if the entire case was sustained by absence of evidence, of witnesses, of a past. Write this down. Absence speaks louder, because sometimes the silence of a lead that leads nowhere says more than any clear evidence. Now I want to dive even deeper into this topic. With the investigation advancing and the lack of concrete answers, theories began to emerge, some more fanciful, others based on real behavioral patterns and past investigations. One of the most popular was that he could be a spy. The coldness in his movements, the absence of documents, the complete erasure of traces, all of this recalled ancient accounts from the Cold War, where trained agents lived for decades under made-up names and died carrying information that could never be revealed. The healthy but mysteriously disconnected body reinforced the idea of sophisticated poisoning, imperceptible to common tests. But this hypothesis stumbled upon an uncomfortable detail. If he really was a spy, why would he have been abandoned, like any unknown person? Another recurring theory points to a criminal on the run, someone who committed something serious, perhaps even a crime that was never discovered, and spent the last years trying to erase any trace of their existence. This theory, while plausible, falters due to the lack of a concrete connection to any serious open occurrences. Nothing pointed directly to this, and more than that, the serenity with which he was found, without weapons, without money, without visible signs of paranoia, seemed to contradict the typical behavior of someone in a constant state of alert. There are those who argue that he could have been a victim of abuse, someone who spent their life trying to escape something that marked them since childhood. People like that learn to hide early, to trust no one, to build layers of protection that go beyond the physical. They are mental survival strategies. Changing identity in this case might have been a way to maintain sanity, to create a world where the pain of the past could no longer reach him. Yet even this reading, with all its emotional weight, does not completely explain the why of the death, nor the timing, nor the careful preparation for the end. Others raise the hypothesis that he could have been part of a witness protection program, and that for some reason, a failure, a betrayal, or a new threat, he ended up becoming vulnerable. This would explain the lack of records, the absolute anonymity, and even the forced calm in the last days of life. But this theory raises an uncomfortable question. If he was protected, who failed him? And why did no one come for him when he disappeared? The most curious thing is that, when looking at these possibilities, we realize that they all intersect at one point. He chose silence. Whether out of survival, guilt, fear, or loyalty to something greater, his journey was shaped by invisible decisions, by a hidden truth that may never come to light, and perhaps that is exactly the most profound impact of this story. The feeling that not everything that cannot be proven ceases to be real. Comment below. There's something in this story that doesn't want to be told. I really want to know which of these theories makes the most sense to you, or if, like me, you also feel there is a piece that is still well hidden. Now, I want to dive even deeper into this topic. There is a fine line between fleeing from something and trying to start anew. And when we think about the possibility of someone completely abandoning their own identity, we are not just talking about a radical act. We are talking about a pain that accumulates, about an urgency for transformation so intense that the only possible way seems to be becoming another person. It's not easy to understand this, but psychology shows that for some minds marked by traumas, humiliations, or extreme experiences, the name they carry can become a sort of cell, a constant reminder of everything they no longer want to be. This man, with his calm gestures and the deafening absence of connections, perhaps was not fleeing from anyone. Maybe he was just trying to free himself from himself. Starting over is not about erasing mistakes. It's about trying to breathe again, without the weight of the old versions. The decision to change identity in this context is not just practical. It's symbolic. It's an attempt to break away from an old narrative to create a new one, even if lonely, even if without witnesses. And this has happened before. There are records of people who spent years living under false names, identities created from fragments of imagination and the necessity to survive. People who disappeared from families, from cities, from stories. Some were found decades later, others never. In many of these cases, the reason was not crime, but shame, fear, or simply the feeling of no longer belonging anywhere. When the mind associates its own story with pain or danger, cutting everything may seem like the only way to remain standing. The mentality of escape is complex. It's not just about fear, but an extreme effort to maintain control over a life that seems to have slipped through the fingers. And this creates a devastating effect. In hiding, a person not only abandons what holds them back, but also what defined them. And then a question arises that doesn't leave your mind. Who are you when no one knows your name? What remains when even the memory that built you is left behind? Identity, in many cases, is a social reflection, the way the world recognizes us. But when that reflection begins to hurt, to distort who we are, it can become a silent prison. And perhaps that's what this man felt. Perhaps he wasn't on the run. Perhaps he was just trying to be free, free from guilt, free from labels, free of the version of yourself that prevented you from breathing lightly. Write this down: freedom or escape. I really want to know how this resonated with you, because sometimes what seems like cowardice might be someone's last cry, who just wanted to exist differently. Now I want to dive even deeper into this topic. As the weeks went by and the case remained unanswered, one thing began to weigh behind the scenes: the emotional impact on those trying to decipher that riddle. No matter how much investigators and experts are trained to deal with the inexplicable, there is a point where even the most rational professionals find themselves at their limit. The moment when neither logic nor science can handle the mystery anymore. A nameless body, a past without a trail, a story that ends before it starts. This is not just a puzzle. It is a constant presence that begins to inhabit the silence of police stations, the cold hallway of the coroner's office, the routine of those who vowed to seek the truth. Some even dreamed of him, literally. One of the experts mentioned off the record that he would often wake up at night with the feeling that he had forgotten to look at something, that perhaps he had overlooked a hidden detail in the fold of a garment, in the depth of a look frozen in a camera image. Because when such a case crosses the line of reason, it enters the soul of those who carry it. It's as if the silence of the dead begins to converse with the weariness of the living. And this didn't happen only in this case. There are other records like this, of bodies found without identity, that even years later remain nameless, without origin. Cases like the Isdal woman in Norway, or the Somerton man in Australia, still provoke fascination and frustration worldwide. They are real stories, shrouded in layers of mystery, where each attempt at an explanation seems to bump up against something denser, something that cannot be seen but can be felt. The absence of an answer becomes presence. The void takes shape. And the most disconcerting part, time does not erase it. It only deepens the enigma. Forensic science, with all its advancements, still depends on something very simple to function: the existence of data, fingerprints in the system, genetic comparisons, records in public or private databases. But when the system is confronted with absolute silence, it fails. Not due to lack of effort, but because of lack of raw material. And this messes with the ego, with the sense of purpose, with the belief that there will always be a solution. In this case, silence was not just the end, it was the answer. And no one was prepared for that. The teams involved followed protocols, exhausted possibilities, reported every detail on paper. But they emerged from this process with something more, a restlessness that cannot be explained in a report. The feeling that they were facing something greater, perhaps more symbolic than technical. A nameless man who exposed the fragility of all systems, legal, scientific, emotional. Because in the end, what remains is this raw, unvarnished question: how far can we go when the truth decides not to reveal itself? Comment this. This silence speaks to me too, because sometimes what marks us the most is what has never been said out loud. Now I want to dive even deeper into this topic. There's something profoundly disturbing in knowing that some truths simply get lost. Not because we didn't search hard enough, but because maybe they were never meant to be found. When a person dies, taking with them everything that defined them, their name, their origins, their mistakes, and even their pains, what remains is not just a void, but a kind of echo, a constant whisper that seems to repeat, "You will never know." And this is a type of mystery that challenges not only the investigation, but also our own need for closure. Because the human mind has difficulty accepting loose ends, and when life ends, leaving open questions, it also affects how we see our own stories. The death of this man is, above all, a full stop placed in the middle of a sentence, an ending that seems to have been chosen, even planned. There is no record, no public mourning, no wake, no identity, just absence, and strong, dense, almost physical. And yet, it is this absence that makes him unforgettable. He is gone. But will we ever know who he was, or what he faced in silence, carrying a secret, until his last breath? Perhaps it was trauma, perhaps a mistake that couldn't be repaired, perhaps a forbidden love, a desperate escape, or simply the refusal to continue being who he was. Truth, when it silences, becomes an enigma. And in this case, perhaps silence was more than a defense. It was a decision, a way of taking control. Because no matter how much we talk about freedom, choices, and new beginnings, there are those who choose to disappear precisely because they believe that only in anonymity will they find peace. And that is no less cruel, because this type of disappearance does not only hurt those who go, but also those who stay, trying to understand, reconstruct, fill gaps with hypotheses that never confirm. It is on this fine line between what we know and what we will never know that this case stands. A story told by the absences, by the questions that persist, by the gazes that searched for something in the records and found not even a shadow. And the more time passes, the more it becomes a symbol of everything that escapes us, of what cannot fit into files, of what cannot be captured by words. Perhaps the true crime here is the silence. Comment this. There are stories that only silence explains, because sometimes what binds us to a mystery fears not what is missing, but what it forces us to feel. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this story has also traversed you. Perhaps it was the mystery, perhaps the silence, or perhaps the weight of imagining how many truths we will never hear. That's why this channel exists, to open space for this type of conversation, to dive deep where few dare to go, with respect, care, and a dose of restlessness that moves us. So if this content made sense to you, if it touched you in some way, subscribe here, because there is much more coming. Stories that provoke, that unsettle, that make us look differently at what seems invisible. And if you felt that you walked with me to the end, write down in the comments, "I'm with you to the end." I read everything, and each one of those messages shows that this journey is worth it. Also, leave a like if you feel that this connection was real. Sometimes a simple gesture like this helps this content reach those who need to hear it most. There's the last video that just came out next to this one that complements this topic. Click and continue with me over there. Because there are stories that only make sense when we allow ourselves to go all the way.